We're now streaming on YouTube, so Chair Hart, when we get to 12:30, we should be good to go.
Thank you. I'll call a 2-minute warning in a few minutes. Is everybody ready to go? This is the 2-minute warning. Thank you. Everybody ready? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hereby call this remote meeting of the Washington Metrorail Safety Commission to order. This meeting is being recorded as well as streamed live for the public. Mr. Spitulnik, do we have a quorum today?
Yes, Chair Hart, we have a quorum. Chair Hart, Vice Chair Hall, Secretary Treasurer for our Dyke, Commissioner Rush, Commissioner Al-Khatib, and alternate Commissioner Lobby are present.
Thank you, Mr. Spitulnik. We will start today with our safety message from the Metrorail Safety Commission's Emergency Management Specialist, Richard David. Mr.
Thank you,
David.
Chair Hart. Thank you, Chair Hart. Being vaccinated, getting boosters, and wearing high-quality masks such as N95s are the best way to protect yourself and others from COVID-19. Please stay informed, stay healthy, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. David. We will now move on to the minutes from our last meeting. Secretary Treasurer Farrar-Dyke, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. The minutes were posted for your review of December 7th meeting. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? If not, I move approval of the December 7th minutes as circulated. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Shahir has seconded the motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say yay.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. Council Chuck Spitulnik, the vote is,
Vote is 5-0. The motion is passed.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spitulnik. Next item on the agenda is public comments. We provide an opportunity for public comments at each of our meetings, and we will now ask if any members of the public who have joined our Zoom webinar would like to speak. If you want to speak, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and our staff will unmute one person at a time. Each person will have a maximum of 2 minutes. I will pause now to see if we have any public comments. While we're waiting, I would also remind everyone, including those of you watching on YouTube, that you can always report any concerns through our website, WMSC.gov, through our social media channels like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or by email. Mr. Spitulnik, do we have anyone who has indicated they would like to speak? I'm sorry, that would be Mr. Smith. Do we have anyone who has indicated they would like to speak?
Chair Hart, either way, no, I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. We will now continue with the next agenda item, which is my remarks. Our meeting today includes updates on the Washington Metrorail Safety Commission's ongoing safety oversight activities, including the status of Metrorail's response to our most recent order related to the 7000 series rail cars. The WMSC is continuing our active involvement in the National Transportation Safety Board investigation into the October 12 derailment. The WMSC has also been frequently communicating with Metrorail regarding their plans as required under our order to return each 7000 series rail car to revenue service. WMSC staff will provide further updates on this subject later in this meeting. The WMSC has been continuing our other work to identify and require Metrorail to address safety issues, including through our robust safety audit and corrective action plan oversight process. Later in this meeting, we will also consider several safety event investigations. That concludes my remarks. Dr. Mayer, do you have any opening remarks?
Yes, sir, I do. We, as you said, continue our work as part of the NTSB investigation into the October, into the October 12th derailment. Our teams are also frequently interacting with Metrorail in relation to our December 29th order, keeping the 7000 series rail cars out of service until Metrorail develops an acceptable return to service plan. Our strong independent oversight of the plan Metrorail developed in December is what allowed us to identify that Metrorail did not follow their plan. We identified this using several of the tools we have, including direct access to WMATA systems and databases. As you know, this led to our order keeping the 7000 series rail cars out of service until Metrorail develops a safe return to service plan with, among other things, additional internal checks. It is up to Metrorail to determine the time needed to gather the information and tools that it needs to develop and implement a safe return to service plan as required under our order. Our staff is communicating with Metrorail on an ongoing basis about the 7000 series rail cars and with all of the parties to the NTSB investigation of the derailment. Metrorail has not provided a specific timeline for when it plans to submit their return to service plan, and our order does not contain any deadlines. We appreciate Metrorail taking the time that it needs to ensure that it prepares a sufficient plan that it can effectively implement as required by our order to provide for the safety of riders, workers, and others. I've asked other members of the WMSC team to provide you a more detailed update for the 7000 series rail cars following my remarks as part of the next agenda item. At the same time, of course, staff are continuing our oversight work in other areas, including safety audits, inspections, investigations, and safety certification oversight. For example, our team recently re-inspected Metro Center Station to ensure that fire life safety concerns that I reported to you last meeting that we identified and communicated to Metrorail have been addressed as directed. The inspection confirmed that these safety issues have been corrected. Concerning our safety audits, Metrorail has until next week to propose any technical corrections to our draft report of the Emergency Preparedness and Fire Life Safety Audit. We expect to finalize and issue that audit report next month. We are preparing draft reports for our rail operations audit and our station maintenance, elevators, and escalators audit. Mr. Raddick will describe those in more detail later during this meeting. As you noted, Chair Hart, our audit work and other day-to-day interactions with Metrorail are a critical part of the proactive nature of our work to identify safety issues before a safety event occurs. It is up to Metrorail to propose and carry out the corrective action plans to address these safety deficiencies. The WMSC provides specific feedback on each Metrorail corrective action plan proposal if revisions are required, and once approved, we oversee Metrorail's implementation of those caps. We use a variety of tools at our disposal to ensure that Metrorail implements safety improvements. One such area is roadway worker protection. Our independent oversight and multiple safety event investigations have identified deficiencies in Metrorail's implementation of its RWP program. Changes are required as part of the investigation reports that you have adopted, and Metrorail is implementing those through the Recommended Corrective Action, or RCA, process that Ms. Samara Singha and Mr. Quigley will provide a status report on later during this meeting. Metrorail staff brought an overview of these needed RWP improvements to the WMATA board earlier this month. During that presentation, Metrorail staff committed publicly, as they had already committed to the WMSC, to additional immediate short-term actions, to mid-range plans, and to safety improvements through rule, procedure, and training rewrites over the next 18 months to 2 years. We look forward to Metrorail continuing its commitment in this important safety area to reduce the risk of injuries and fatalities. On another note, we received our FTA audit report this month. We had a follow-up conversation with FTA leadership on this just last week, and they confirmed that addressing the issues that they did identify in their audit will be straightforward through some adjustments to our program documents as part of our continuous improvement process. Finally, as I informed the commissioners earlier this month, I've been invited to testify before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform Subcommittee on Government Operations next month. And I look forward to updating the subcommittee on the WMSC's important safety work. The WMSC subsequently was invited to testify on the very same day before the Maryland General Assembly's House Appropriations Committee's Transportation and Environment Subcommittee. So we will also be testifying there that afternoon. This concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer, for those opening remarks. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners for Dr. Meyer? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to status update on orders related to the 7000 series rail cars. Ms. Samara Singha.
Thank you, Chair Hart. Let me double check that the presentation is up and running before I get started. All right. So this presentation will provide an overview of what occurred from October 12th through As required by the WMSC order, all 7000 series trains are being kept out of passenger service until Metrorail develops and implements a return to service plan as specified in our orders. Metrorail has publicly said that it does not expect to be prepared to implement such a plan for approximately 90 days. This would, of course, require Metrorail to finalize a plan and the WMSC to accept Metrorail's plan before that. Focusing on the timeline to this point, the National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB, is leading the accident investigation into the October 12th derailment. And we are continuing to work with them on the investigation as a party to that investigation. The WMSC responded to the scene of the derailment on October 12th and took steps to maintain the integrity of the derailment scene. The NTSB later made a determination to lead the investigation. The WMSC became a party to the investigation as specified in our program standard. An examination of car 7200 after the derailment showed that both wheels had moved outward on the axle that derailed. Following the derailment, Metrorail conducted a special inspection of wheel back-to-back measurements of all 7000 series rail cars. This inspection identified 20 cars with wheels that were too far apart on at least one axle. On October 16th, Metrorail told us for the first time that it had identified 21 instances from September 2020 through September 2021, where the wheels on the 7000 series rail cars were found to be too far apart during routine 90-day inspections. Metrorail also stated that it had further found other back-to-back inspection failures on the 7000 series rail cars dating back to 2017, information that also had not been disclosed to us before. Metrorail processes required these cars to be removed from service for repair. However, the WMSC identified through our independent oversight work that Metrorail had returned to passenger service at least 2 of these cars that failed the post-derailment special inspections. We then acted to ensure that the safety of passengers and employees by ordering Metrorail to remove all 7000 series rail cars from passenger service until Metrorail developed a plan under our oversight to safely return each car to service. To briefly explain the back-to-back measurement, this is the distance between the insides of the wheels on a given axle, as the diagram shows. This distance needs to be within very specific parameters so that the wheels match the tracks and the train does not derail. Metrorail's standard for the distance between the insides of the wheel is that it be between 53¼ inches and 53�3/8 inches. This distance is based on Metrorail's 56¼ inch track gauge, or the distance between the rails. Together, this is designed to ensure that the main part or tread of the wheel rides properly on top of the rails. Metrorail also measures the distance between the inside of the wheel and the bearing on the axle. Metrorail defines anything 0.005 inches or greater as a problem that requires monitoring. Following our October 17th order, the WMSC continued our frequent interactions with Metrorail. This included technical discussions and data reviews, WMSC observations of critical parts of Metrorail's engineering test procedure that Metrorail conducted as part of its return to service plan development, and WMSC discussions with WMATA about details of Metrorail's return to service plan requirements once Metrorail began to develop those details. Following several review and feedback sessions, Metrorail submitted a revised plan that we communicated on December 14th that we had no technical objections to. That communication included another reminder that, as already specified in Metrorail's plan, WMATA was required to follow the plan and that Metrorail must keep the WMSC apprised of all activities and specific deviations from the plan. We conducted inspections of the implementation of this plan, including observing training, observing back-to-back wheel measurements being conducted under Metrorail's new procedure, and reviews of Metrorail's documentation and systems. Metrorail's plan included, among other things, a new procedure for weekly back-to-back inspections and training on that new procedure. The procedure specified that frontline technicians could only mark a wheel set as passing the inspection if the wheel set was both within overall required dimensions and the difference from that last inspection was less than 1/32 of an inch. The incremental gauge being used for this measurement is marked in 1/16 of an inch increments. So 1/32 is the smallest movement that could be detected by use of that gauge. Metrorail also included in this plan steps to use a more accurate tool called a dial gauge when axles failed inspections. In addition, if the measurement increased over 2 consecutive inspections, the procedure stated that the wheel set would be condemned. More generally, Metrorail's plan increased the scheduled frequency of these back-to-back inspections from a previously scheduled every 90 days as part of a larger inspection to every 7 days as a standalone inspection. Metrorail also increased full inspection frequencies of the 7000 series rail cars from every 90 days to every 60 days. Metrorail's plan provided for a metered release of rail cars to demonstrate that the plan could be executed safely and effectively. Metrorail returned the first 7000 series rail cars to passenger service under this plan on December 17th. On December 23rd, Metrorail communicated to the WMSC that they had decided to increase the inspection frequency to daily rather than every 7 days. The WMSC conducted careful oversight of Metrorail's implementation of the plan. This included observing inspections being conducted on the cars overnight and reviewing documents and data provided to the WMSC and residing in Metrorail systems. As part of this oversight, we identified on December 29th that Metrorail had put at least 5 cars into service on December 28th that had been measured with an incremental gauge as having a difference from their last inspection of at least 1/32 of an inch. Metrorail's service plan, return to service plan, stated that those cars were not permitted to be in service. Metrorail did not follow its return to service plan. We communicated this to Metrorail's chief safety officer, and shortly thereafter, Metrorail committed to removing all 7000 series rail cars from service. Later that day, we issued an order, keeping the 7000 series rail cars out of passenger service until Metrorail provides a revised return to service plan. This plan must meet the requirements of our orders, including specific additional protections and internal oversight, and revised inspection frequency and any other criteria based on available data. Our further investigations identified that Metrorail had, without communication with the WMSC, changed the back-to-back measurement procedure that was specified in its return to service plan. The WMSC discovered a revision 2 of the back-to-back inspection procedure that had signatures from people representing various Metrorail departments and stated it was effective December 27, 2021. As I noted a few moments ago, thanks to our active oversight, we discovered this quickly based on the results of Metrorail's back-to-back inspections conducted on the night of December 27th and into December 28th. Revisions 2 added the words equal to so that a measured movement of 1/32 of an inch would be marked as passed by a technician, contrary to WMATA's accepted plan. This would have allowed cars that Metrorail had measured wheel movement on to be returned to service, contrary to Metrorail's plan that was accepted by the WMSC. Compared to the procedure as of December 14th, this revision 2 also completely removed the use of the dial gauge, the more accurate measuring tool. Revision 2 would have relied solely on the use of the less accurate incremental gauge. This revision was not submitted to or discussed with the WMSC. Consequently, Metrorail did not follow its return to service plan. Metrorail had separately submitted a request and supporting documentation on December 21st related to the planned use of a digital dial gauge to conduct at least some back-to-back measurements. The WMSC acknowledged this request and emphasized on December 22nd that all governing procedures, protocols, instructions, and training would need to be revised to reflect a change to a new tool. That training would need to be conducted and that, as Metrorail's plan stated, no rail car would be released for passenger service without passing the required inspections. The entirety of this communication about the digital dial gauge was prior to the date of any signatures on Metrorail's revision 2 of the back-to-back inspection procedure. Revision 2 did not add any reference to the use of this digital dial gauge tool. The next step moving forward is for Metrorail to develop a new return to service plan as specified in WMSC's December 29th order. Metrorail must develop a full and complete approach. The WMSC does not set a timeline for this because the WMSC's priority is a plan that provides for the safety of riders, workers, and others. Metrorail announced publicly on January 13th that it does not expect to have such a plan prepared and ready for implementation until at least spring. Work continues on causal analysis and data and report analysis, including work with the NTSB as it relates directly to the derailment investigation. This information can help inform Metrorail's plan development and our review. Some of this work is being conducted with the assistance of the Transportation Technology Center Incorporated, or TTCI, which is working with Metrorail to study the movement of the wheels on the axles. We continue our active oversight. This includes frequent interactions with Metrorail and open lines of communications for any questions or discussions. We continue our independent reviews of data and reports. When a future plan is in place, we will closely monitor the implementation of this plan as we did for the prior plan. That concludes my update. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Samar Singha. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners for Ms. Samar Singha?
A question, Chair Hart.
Yes, Commissioner Hall.
Ms. Samar Singha, with regards to this second order that we have now issued, are we satisfied with the level of cooperation that we are now seeing with Metro regarding the removal of the 7000 series cars and what is required for the reentry of these cars?
Commissioner Hall, presently, yes, that would be, we are satisfied with the interactions that Metro conducts with us. And as I mentioned in my remarks, our lines of communications are open 24 hours a day, and we are available to discuss and interact and work together with Metro on whatever questions that arise.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Hall. Any other questions from any of the other commissioners? Seeing none, we will move on to our next item, which is audits, with an update from Audit Program Manager, Dr. Davis Rotic. Mr. Davis Rotic. Mr. Rotic, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Hart. Metrorail has until next week to provide any technical corrections for our draft emergency preparedness and fire life safety audit report. As with each of our audits, the work on this audit included extensive reviews of Metrorail documents, on-site work such as interviews with numerous people, and site visits to various parts of the Metrorail system, and review of the relevant criteria such as the requirements of Metrorail's Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. Requirements specified in other Metrorail documents such as SOPs and orders and regulatory or other requirements. As always, we will carefully consider technical corrections for Metrorail, if there are any, before issuing a final report in coming weeks. Following the issuance of the final report, Metrorail will have 30 days to develop and submit corrective action plan proposals to address any findings. We are preparing to transmit a draft report of our rail operations audit to Metrorail shortly. This audit addressed the tasks carried out by and training for personnel such as train operators, interlocking operators, station managers, rail quality control officers, and rail supervisors. Our station maintenance, elevator, and escalator audit team is conducting final document review and analysis. Site visits and interviews for this audit were conducted last month. We have just completed review of follow-up documents requested based on our on-site work and have an exit conference scheduled with Metrorail tomorrow. We will be working to finalize the text of a draft report over coming weeks. Our next audit will relate to Metrorail communication systems. This audit will examine Metrorail's programs related to voice or data transmission systems and related equipment, for example, radio and public address systems. We transmitted the formal notification letter earlier this month. Metrorail's deadline to provide initial documents is in mid-February. This audit will conclude our first triennial audit cycle, which began a few months after the FTA certified our safety oversight program in March of 2019. As Dr. Meyer explained earlier, these audits cover all aspects of Metrorail's Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan and are designed to proactively identify safety issues, including those areas where Metrorail is not complying with its own procedures or requirements. Because Metrorail did not yet have a PTASP at the start of this triennial cycle, it includes assessments related to the predecessor document, the System Safety Program Plan, for periods when the SSPP was in effect. Metrorail's first PTASP became effective on December 31st, 2020, following your approval in November 2020. Each finding in our audits identifies an area where Metrorail is not complying with its requirements or external requirements, lacks a necessary requirement or procedure, has requirements or procedures that are insufficient for safety, or where there is an unsafe condition. For each of our findings, Metrorail is required to develop and implement a corrective action plan. Our teams review Metrorail corrective action plan proposals and provide feedback if revisions are required. Even after a CAP is implemented, WMSC monitors Metrorail operations as part of our regular inspections and oversight to ensure that the safety changes remain in place and are continually assessed for effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ratic. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners for Mr. Ratic?
Chair Hart?
Yes, Commissioner Rush, please.
Yeah, I'd like to return to the 7,000 series discussion. I'm sorry, I couldn't find my finger was very sloppy on the mute button. I'd like to revisit an issue there, or visit an issue. Staff mentioned during the presentation on the 7,000 series investigation, work done by the Transportation Technology Center, Inc., or TTCI. TTCI is a subsidiary of the Association of American Railroads. As you know, Chair Hart, I work for AAR. I would like to state for the record that while I've certainly worked with TTCI in the past and continue to work with TTCI, in no way do I have any involvement, nor do I anticipate to have any involvement with the 7000 series investigation by TTCI. The WMSC's work on the 7000 series cars, of course, has all occurred on the staff level, hasn't been something that required any action by the commissioners. If we do need to vote on something involving the 7000 series cars going forward, I do not see the need at this point to recuse myself at this time. But if that changes, I certainly will let you and the other commissioners know. And I apologize again for not bringing this up, not having my finger on that mute button. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rush, and no need for an apology, but thank you for that disclosure. If there is a need for a vote by the commissioners that involves any TTCI activities, we will ask for our council's opinion whether your disclosure of the connection with them is sufficient under the circumstances, or will recusal be warranted. Meanwhile, are there any questions from any of the commissioners? Did someone speak? Okay, so thank you again, Commissioner Rush, for that disclosure. That helps. That really helps demonstrate how important transparency is to the commission in its work of overseeing the safety of WMATA. We will now take up the next agenda item, which is corrective action plans. Ms. Samara Singha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Hart. I will begin with an update on those caps that are a result of our WMSC findings issued in audits or other circumstances. And then Mr. Adam Quigley will provide an update on other corrective actions that we track separately that have been initiated due to the results of safety event investigations. In each case, these actions are taken to improve safety. Metrorail has some corrective action plans opened prior to the WMSC assuming safety oversight in 2019 that it has not fully or yet implemented. For example, a cap related to radio communication protocols. Our requirements for Metrorail to improve Rail Operations Control Center have contributed to improvements in communications by rail controllers, but there are continuing communication deficiencies by other Metrorail personnel. The initial Rail Operations Control Center safety improvements implemented under CAP 0020 are one example of a corrective action plan required to address a WMSC finding that has been closed. That closure related to our December 2019 finding that there was chaos and dysfunction in the ROCC. Metrorail has additional work to do to complete implementation of other caps that address further significant safety improvements in the ROCC required by other findings, including findings from the September 2020 ROCC audit. Under those corrective action plans that are still being implemented, Metrorail has taken initial steps towards improvements. Metrorail has committed to final completion dates for those caps over the next 2 years. The longest cap in this area relates to demonstrating required retention and recruitment at the ROCC. We monitor the work that is progressing on each cap as WMATA implements the corrections to solve the safety gaps that we have identified. As for current cap development, following revisions and feedback, we have approved for implementation 11 of the 15 corrective action plans proposed by Metro to address findings and recommendations from our fitness for duty audit. Examples of the safety improvements that these caps will bring include ensuring that all safety-sensitive employees receive physicals as required by Metrorail policy, so that the personnel are medically ready to perform safety-critical duties such as operating and dispatching trains. Also, examples of these improvements include more robust data tracking that will enable trend analysis for the first time in this area. Similarly, we have approved for implementation 11 of 15 corrective action plans proposed by Metrorail to address findings and recommendations from our railcar audit. Examples of the safety improvements that these caps will bring include ensuring that rail cars are undergoing rehabilitation, follow safety certification requirements from project planning through return to revenue service. Training railcar mechanics and engineers on the specific tasks they are assigned to perform, and standardizing railcar processes such as how to address wheels out of ground. Similarly, we have approved for implementation 7 of 12 corrective action plans proposed by Metro to address findings and recommendations from our traction power audit. Examples of these improvements, these safety improvements that these caps will bring, include ensuring that all required preventative maintenance inspections are documented, tracked, and conducted, and providing for proactive planning for the renewal of traction power systems that are past due their useful life. Metrorail submitted revisions to their remaining corrective action plans for the fitness for duty and railcar audits last week, and our team is now reviewing those proposals as specified in the program standard. I will now turn it over to Adam Quigley for the current status update on another group of corrective actions referred to as recommended corrective actions, or RCAs, that are being tracked and completed to address safety issues identified through safety event investigations.
Thank you. These corrective actions, as specified in our program standard, all require Metrorail to address issues or concerns identified during safety event investigations. We require Metrorail to log and track these corrective actions through closure and completion, and we oversee this process, including the status and timelessness of implementation. The program standard requires these plans to identify the specific action that has or will be taken to eliminate or mitigate future risk. Our investigations team and Metrorail's investigation team monitor progress on these corrective actions on a regular basis. This monitoring includes the specific actions planned, the timeline for implementation, and the status of implementation. As part of the significant improvements to investigation reports Metrorail has made under our oversight over the last 2 years, these actions are now specifically listed with tracking information and projected completion dates in each final safety event investigation report. Some of these corrective actions related to investigations are completed by the time you adopt a report, while others take months or longer. This depends on the scope and scale of each individual corrective action identified in the investigation process. For those events that occurred in 2021 that the commissioners have adopted investigation reports for, Metrorail has documented completion of approximately 40% of the corrective actions. This completion percentage counts those corrective actions referenced in multiple investigation reports only once. Completed actions include Metrorail Safety Department's initial review of its rulebook, the MSRPH, to identify opportunities for improvement. Metrorail has begun the longer-term work to rewrite that rulebook and to rewrite the roadway work protection, or RWP, procedures, which I will describe more in a moment. Other examples of work that remains underway, or that at a minimum has not yet had documentation provided to demonstrate completion, include placing restrictions on internet use for terminal and tower computers to reduce the risk of distraction, as we identified in the investigation you adopted last month. This was due at the end of last month, and we continue our oversight to ensure it is in place. In addition, work has begun on some corrective actions related to reports that will be presented to you at future meetings. Specific to roadway worker protection, there are a number of individual short-term actions that have been completed or that are in place through the RCA process to address specific issues identified in the investigations that we have presented to you over the last year. These short-term actions provide safety mitigations as Metrorail's broader rulebook and roadway protection program rewrites progress, as Metrorail has committed to over the next 18 months. Examples of items Metrorail has already began are improvements to information sharing regarding general orders and track rate system data and current work zone setup requirements, along with initial supervisory controls Metrorail implemented in the Rail Operations Control Center related to granting PAL time. Our consistent focus in investigations and other forms on the importance of Metrorail having an effective RWP program has also contributed to the Metrorail contribute to Metrorail increasing compliance checks on roadway work protection. Metrorail is currently working to develop new separate procedures for granting foul time and exclusive track occupancy, to revise job safety briefing forms to include more open-ended questions, and to provide additional procedures related to piggybacking work crews. Metrorail is aiming to have the roadway job safety briefing form revisions completed by March of this year. Metrorail is also moving within the next 3 months to gather information on options to further improve RWP training. Specific examples of rulebook revisions associated with investigations as an RCA are that the safety department will ensure procedures are established and implemented for the use of work vehicles, prime movers, to set up work areas, and will ensure that there are clear policies and procedures that are followed related to the safety of piggyback work crews. This is all in addition to the broader changes that Metrorail is developing through their decision to have their safety department more directly manage Metrorail's overarching safety standards, and that will be implemented in more detail by Metrorail's operating department. Metrorail has committed to completing an assessment of its RWP program as a whole this spring. Metrorail is also developing improvements to the way it identifies and maintains the list of hotspots where additional roadway protection is required. Metrorail has laid out a schedule for improvements that include the rulebook revisions by summer 2023 and additional RWP-focused implementation through 2024. The WMSC will continue to monitor these safety improvements as Metrorail develops the broader RWP and rulebook revisions. Thank you. That completes this presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Samar Singh and Mr. Quigley, for that update. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners for Ms. Samar Singh or Mr. Quigley? Seeing none, we will now move to our next item on the agenda, which is our regular status report on our oversight of the Silver Line Phase 2 safety certification process. Mr. Sahu, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hart. So Metrorail and the Airports Authority have completed simulated service demonstrations on the mainline tracks. Essentially, the mainline is part of the project where passengers will ride. The results of this testing are under review. The rail yard is still undergoing systems performance demonstrations and yard train control testing. MWA is also working on completing necessary work and receiving certificates of occupancy for the stations and facilities. These preparations are necessary steps before Metrorail can take provisional care, custody, and control of the line at what is known as the operational readiness state. Metrorail has not set a specific timeline for that date at this point. The operational readiness date will be declared by Metrorail when all open construction items are mitigated or closed. This is when we at the WMSC will complete the final revision of Part 1 of our pre-revenue service review, focused on the line's construction by MWA. We're tracking approximately 16 open items at this point in our pre-revenue service review Part 1 out of more than 100 items that we have tracked over the course of this process. All of these items have agreed upon paths forward to be completed. Items that have longer completion times may be carried forward into Part 2 of our pre-revenue service review if they do not impact operational readiness. Part 2 of our PRSR will cover Metrorail's testing and preparedness to operate and maintain the line. This includes ensuring that Metrorail has met its staffing, training, and testing requirements to safely operate the extension, and that Metrorail has taken the other steps required by its safety certification program plan and the cooperative agreement between MWA and WMATA. We expect the amount of time that we spend physically on site will increase following the operational readiness state when additional Metrorail testing and operations increase. Metrorail has not set a date for this work or for when it is aiming to start revenue service. Metrorail will prepare a safety and security certification verification report. The safety and security certification verification report is Metrorail's documentation that it has identified and appropriately mitigated known hazards and that the project has followed other aspects of the design, construction, and implementation process. Our concurrence with Metrorail's safety and security certification verification report is required before the line may open for passenger service. All of these steps and requirements are based on Metrorail's own safety certification requirements, agreements, and policies. The timing of our work is entirely dependent on the progress that the Airports Authority and Metrorail make on their work to demonstrate that each required step has been completed. This includes the closure and mitigation of items that the WMSC has identified and communicated through our independent safety reviews of the project. In accordance with our program standard and FTA guidance, we also work in concert with the separate FTA project management oversight on this project to ensure that our work is complete while avoiding duplication of effort. We continue to closely monitor the Airports Authority and Metrorail's progress, and we'll continue our work in coming months. Thank you, and that completes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Sahu. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners? From Mr. Sahu?
I have a question, Chair Hart.
Yes, please, Commissioner Lobby.
Mr. Sahu, with the status of the 7,000 cars, is this having any effect on the rollout of the testing or potentially, a service date for this new line?
So, per our original order, our original order did say you cannot use 7Ks for passenger service, but it did not stop Metrorail from using it for testing purposes. So they were able to use the 7Ks to not only finish simulated service part 1, but simulated service part 2 on the main line, and then also use them for yard train control testing. As I believe per our second order, Metrorail does have to get permission to use 7Ks for testing. But since they're pretty much done with all the testing for mainline and rail yard, we do not see it as a hindrance for the project.
So just to make a correction to that, Commissioner Lobby, neither of the orders require Metro to seek any level of authorization or permission to conduct anything pertaining to the use of the 7,000 series, as long as they are not being used for revenue service. However, there were multiple questions, repeated questions raised by various individuals at Metrorail as well as MWA as work progressed in conducting various kinds of simulated testing associated with Silver Line Phase 2. However, neither of our orders require Metro to seek permission from the WMSC in order to use those trains for testing activities. The only restriction is passenger revenue use.
And I would just add that was by design in both of these orders to ensure that our orders did not in any way interfere with Silver Line activities, and we communicated that very early on, both to make sure that there was no confusion, both in Metro circles and at the Airports Authority.
Well, that's good to know. Certainly when the Silver Line completely, though, there'll be a need for additional train sets. Do we know how many additional train sets will be needed to support service on a day-to-day basis?
Commissioner Lobby, I think I don't know the answer currently. We can reach out to Metro to see what their projections are. They may not know as well yet either. Just with depending on headways, frequencies, so I think that's being hashed out as we speak.
So I would assume that the status of the the investigations going on in the 7,000 cars could potentially have an impact on the opening date for the Silver Line. Is that logical?
That would be logical.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lobby, for those questions. Any questions from any of the other commissioners from Mr. Sahu? Okay, hearing none, we will now move on to safety investigation reports that are being presented today. Would like to suggest a change in our usual procedure in that we will hear all of the presentations on the reports and then take a single motion to adopt all of the reports that we are prepared to adopt at the end of the presentations. To begin the presentations, investigations analyst Ms. Natalie Kiro will present the first report. Ms. Kiro.
Thank you, Chair Hart. Investigation Whiskey 0140 relates to a red signal overrun at Twin Brook Station on September 28, 2021. This occurred approximately 2 weeks after Metrorail closed Rockville and Shady Grove stations for construction work. Those stations reopened a week and a half ago. During the closure, Twinbrook Station was functioning as a terminal or end of the line station. The interlocking at Twinbrook Station is on the outbound end of the station. In this event, the train arrived at Twinbrook and went out of service. However, there was no verification that all riders were off the train. 2 riders were still on board. A train operator then moved the train in the same direction of travel through the interlocking to cross from track 2 to track 1. This was done with proper switch alignment and a lunar or proceed signal. A second train operator at the other end of the train, the inbound end, then improperly entered stop and proceed mode and moved the train past the red signal and into the interlocking back toward track 1 without permission. Had that train operator waited for proper rail alignment and signal aspect, the train would have remained on track 1 to return to the station to go into service toward Glenmont. ROCC removed the rail power, evacuated the 2 riders on the train onto the roadway, and walked them back to the station. As Mr. Ratzig mentioned earlier, the WMSC is finalizing a draft rail operations audit report in the coming weeks. This audit assessed areas including training, territory familiarization, and supervisory oversight. Following this event, Metrorail distributed notices and reminders to train operators. In addition to the safety issues identified directly related to this red signal overrun, the investigation identified radio communication system deficiencies at Twinbrook Station. The WMSC has just initiated a communication system audit that will include a focus on Metrorail's radio systems. Thank you. That completes this presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Kiro. Do we have any idea how long those 2 passengers were on the train before they were able to come off?
I believe it was a few minutes. It wasn't an extended period of time.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any of the other commissioners for Ms. Kiro?
I have a question, Chair Hart.
Yes, please, Commissioner Lobby.
Yeah, we seem to continuously into these radio communication issues. Are these issues, do they come and go? I mean, if you have bad radio communication at a given point, is that a constant, or does it depend on the weather or something else? Because we seem to continually, have communication problems, and I would assume at this point Metro would know where they are and do something to improve them. Am I misunderstanding the situation?
So I would say they do come and go. It's not a constant radio communication problem in only one area. You'll have sometimes where the radio is clear and then maybe even moments later it's not. So the audit, I'm sure will reveal more, but I believe it's a very broad system-wide problem. That's not just a spotty area.
There's a pattern in these investigation reports where the employees involved claim that there was bad radio reception or there were radio issues, and then the communications department goes out and checks the area and everything's always deemed fine. They never find anything. So that's what we're hoping this audit will kind of dive into, and we can get to the bottom of why is it every time that the comm department goes out, everything is just working great and 100% clear, and repeat backs are not a problem.
Well, I would assume that it may have something to do with radio communications, but also the quality of the radio receiving the communications, and hopefully that'll be part of the audit also. Is that your understanding, Mr. Quigley?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Lobby. Any other questions from any of the other commissioners for Ms. Kiro? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Kiro, please continue with the next 2 reports.
Thank you, Chair Hart. These reports relate to 2 improper roadway worker protection events in September 2021. The first event, Whiskey 0141, involves a rail controller improperly granting foul time to a track inspection team while a train was moving through the area where protection was needed. The track inspection team saw the train and did not enter the area. The inspectors immediately informed the rail controller, and foul time was then properly granted before the inspectors continued their inspection. The rail controller was removed from service. The rail controller had opened a zoomed in section of the Advanced Information Management System screen that had blocked their view of part of the screen showing the location of train 121. The second event, Whiskey 0142, relates to a low voltage electrical maintenance crew that was on the roadway approximately 3,500 feet beyond their working limits. This was identified by the ROCC when two members of the crew placed shunts on the roadway at and then just outside Roslyn Station. Their working limits were in the area of Courthouse Station. This investigation identified that the roadway job safety briefing was not properly conducted, that the job assignment was not clearly communicated and understood, and that a piggybacking work crew began work even though the work zone was not properly established. As explained in prior meetings, Metrorail conducted a safety stand down this fall following this and other events that focused on roadway worker protection procedures. Mr. Quigley explained Metrorail's RWP corrective actions earlier related to this and other safety events. Metrorail is rewriting its roadway worker protection rules and training programs over the next 2 years. The WMSC is keeping a close eye on Metrorail's progress toward that commitment. Thank you. That completes this presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Kiro. Are there any questions from the commissioners for Ms. Kiro?
I have a couple of questions, Chair Hart.
Yes, please, Commissioner Lowry.
This is an interesting incident. Let me ask a simple question first. When they talk about putting shunts on the line, what exactly does that entail? Is that essentially, does that involve the third rail, or does that involve just the running rails, or what? Or do we know?
I think we do know, and I believe Bruce Walker is dialing in here to give us an explanation.
Yes, so when they're putting shunts down on the third rail, power is usually required to be de-energized because you're in close proximity to the third rail, but you do have to wear protective high voltage gloves at that time. The purpose of that is to denote or to send a representation to the control center and other trains that there is something going on within that area, and it's a protective procedure to stop something from inadvertently entering the area to protect the workers within the working limits. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Lobby?
It does. It does involve the third rail, but you know, when you have an area that you're working in, I would assume that the third rail is going to be shut off because that's your exclusive area there. But if you're outside those limits, aren't they putting a shunt on basically a live third rail?
Possibly, yes, possibly.
Okay. And do they know that, or are they surprised? Isn't that an indication that there's something wrong with his work zone, that the third rail is live, or do they even know that it's live when they put the shunt on?
Well, there are times, Commissioner Lobby, with ATC personnel where they will put shunts down on live third rail. So it's not always that the third rail is de-energized, but usually it is de-energized. And the controllers will see where the shunts are with respect to where third rail is energized.
So I'm kind of wondering, are the crews surprised? I mean, do they put the shunt down and a big spark takes place?
No, so the shunt doesn't go on the third rail. It just goes on the track. It doesn't go actually physically on the third rail. So no, they wouldn't know if it's de-energized or not.
It's just the running rails, sir.
Yeah, just the running rails.
Okay, so it's just to shut out the running rails. Okay.
Yeah, it shows track occupancy.
Okay, understand. So that clears that up. The other question I had to do with the documentation that the roadway worker in charge had, where it showed that they had discussed safety of the operation before, and that all the workmen had signed off on it. If I'm a workman and I'm given something to sign, what options do I have if I agree with the document? Do I have a way to report it, or do I just have to sign it in order to keep the peace with the track crew?
No, they do not have to sign it if they feel the safety briefing wasn't done properly, or if there was something missing. Metrorail has really made it very clear about the good faith challenge to every employee. They do not have to sign it.
So is there any explanation why in this case where the safety briefing was not conducted, but the roadway worker in charge presented the safety briefing checklist that requires the signature of each one of the workmen's, why, is there any explanation why every one of them signed it and just went on their happy way?
Again, there seems to be a pattern with these events. I think the bigger question is why these individuals are doing this, and is it because, well, a lot of them mentioned that they don't have a lot of time to get out there and get the work done, that they're supposed to be out there responsible for getting a certain task done, and that the procedures and policies that are put in place, it takes too long for them to get out there, so they shortcut where they deem, I guess, they think is necessary. So the bigger question is how can we stop that? And I think you see the safety department diving in with the RWP procedures, trying to clarify or get rid of all kind of the time it's taken for these individuals to get out there and conduct their work. So I think that to look at the bigger picture is why are they feeling rushed, and why are they signing off to do this just to get the job done?
Well, it seems to me to be as much an integrity issue as being rushed. They know what the requirements are, and yet, they basically choose to work around them in many cases. Maybe they're rushed, maybe they're not. But I would also be interested is Washington Metro keep track of the number of incidents they have where people refuse to sign the documents or refuse to approve the safety briefing when it's not done, or does that just never happen?
That's a good question, and I don't have an answer for that. I am not aware of any type of tracking system that they have for that. Maybe Bruce, Mr. Walker could.
Yes, Commissioner Lobby. Thank you, Mr. Quigley. So with a good faith challenge, that is something that WMATA Metrorail, they do keep on in the employees' files for a 5-year period. So it's tracked. So they do keep track of it, something that is escalated and taken very seriously by the authority. So when it does happen, it is tracked and it lives for 5 years.
So do we know if it's used on a normal basis, or is it just never used?
I can't speak to how WMATA uses the data, but the data is compiled and tracked.
Well, maybe we could ask them that question next time to see how
I
many
will
times
ask.
these good faith challenges are actually used, because this is a situation where you have the process and the procedure in place and people choose just not to follow it. And you can change the process, you can change the training, you can change everything else, but if they choose not to follow it, it's not going to make any difference. Thank you. That's the only questions I had, Chair Hart.
Thank you, Commissioner Lobby. I would like to extend on those questions by asking Dr. Meyer or Mr. Marsinga, do we have any programs going, just looking at the big picture, do we have any programs underway that would help address some of these questions that Commissioner Lobby has raised?
On a regular basis, Chair Hart, our work in conducting monitoring activities, such as through these investigations that we bring forward for your adoption, the audits that we conduct, the regular monitoring and inspection activities that we do of the system and the records and data, all of those things are mechanisms that we use to assess the health of things like the good faith challenge and raising things for correction through findings when we see the need to. So this area, good faith challenge area, is an area that we will need to focus in on and ensure that we have a complete picture on the frequency of the use or invoking of good faith challenges, how they are tracked, how that data is used to improve, if any, practices as it pertains to roadway worker protection. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. And let me just for clarification, let me just ask, do I understand that when a shunt is placed across the track, that's apparent in the ROCC? They can see that a shunt has been placed there?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I think specifically what they can see is an occupied block. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's correct.
So basically the shunt mimics the presence of a rail car, which should then govern the signal system and train movements accordingly.
And indicate that section of track is occupied.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear, the shunt involves a 2 running track, but what if I put a WSAD out or I do a hot stick or something, then I'm involved with the third rail. Is that correct?
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There are any questions from any of the other commissioners for Ms. Key Rose? Okay, thank you. The next report will be Investigation Program Manager Adam Quigley to take the floor. Mr. Quigley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Hart. Investigation Whiskey 0143 relates to an evacuation for life safety reasons of Capitol South Station on October 4th, 2021. Evacuations for life safety reasons are defined as an accident that we are required to investigate under FTA regulation and our program standard. In this case, the evacuation was due to smoke in the station. A fluorescent light bulb connection in the escalator connecting the station platform to the station mezzanine failed. Review of the CCTV video shows that light smoke was visible beginning around 9:07 p.m. with heavier smoke visible around 9:09 p.m. just as train 610 serviced the station. Riders who exited that train brought the smoke to the attention of the station manager, who then turned off the escalators. The station manager turned the escalators off manually at about the same time as a fire alarm activated in the Rail Operations Control Center, and the train operator reported smoke coming from the escalators. After another train, train 912, serviced and left the platform, Metrorail suspended rail service in the area. As a result of the investigation, Metrorail has disconnected all understep lighting on older escalators until light fixtures are replaced with LEDs to reduce heat and reduce the likelihood of similar events in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. I just have a question. Does turning off the escalator, does that mean the inbound escalators or the inbound and outbound escalators? Because I'm just wondering what's the purpose of that? You'd want people to be able to get out easily, but not come in, I assume. So I'm just wondering which escalators are turned off.
It was just the one that was smoking, sir.
The inbound, that's why I'm asking, the inbound escalator or the outbound escalator?
At the time, I believe this was I'm not too sure, to be honest with you, Chair Hart, if it was inbound or outbound.
Thank you. Any other questions from any of the commissioners for Mr. Quigley? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Quigley, will you please present the next report?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Investigation Whiskey 0144 relates to another evacuation for life safety reasons. This evacuation was due to a shooting near the elevators at the platform level of Forest Glen Station on September 12th, 2021. Our investigation does not include the criminal investigation related to the shooting that prompted the evacuation. The FTA and our program standard define our responsibility as investigating the evacuation and associated emergency preparedness. During this event, Metrorail handled the initial event and evacuation properly. Although this investigation identified a number of positive actions, including by the station manager, it has also identified that one train serviced the Forest Glen station while the station was evacuated and being bypassed. The train operator later stated they did not hear the blanket announcement made by the rail controller that the station was closed. As part of this rulebook revision project, Metrorail will reflect information related to blanket announcements directly in its ROC procedures for events related to suspicious activity or bomb threats. In the short term, Metrorail reminded rail controllers to broadcast station bypass announcements on a scheduled basis throughout an incident response. These corrective actions are scheduled to be completed by the end of March. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners for Mr. Quigley?
I have a question, Chair Hart.
Yes, please, Commissioner Lowry.
Yeah, this is another case where instructions are broadcast to everyone, and everybody doesn't get the message for whatever reason. But we already talked about bad radio radio coverage, radio communication issues. But we've had several accidents over the months where someone didn't get the message. Is this a typical way of, for example, telling somebody not to service the station because of an emergency, just to announce it once over the radio and expect that everybody knows it without checking with the individual trains? Is this the only way that they have to provide this information?
So the full procedure as a controller is when you're told to bypass the station is you contact the trains in that immediate area to make sure that they copy direct and that they know and follow the instructions that the train or that the service be bypassed. You make the blanket announcements as well, every few minutes, and then you also call the terminals at the end of the line and relay that information to the terminal supervisors so they can relay that message to the train operators who are either in the blockhouse or getting ready to depart.
So this was like the third train through the area, I believe. Is there any confirmation with the operators of any of the trains? I mean, the first train that's there, is there a two-way conversation where the operator acknowledges, yes, I have the message?
Yes.
And if so, where do they cut it off? One train, two train, three train? Do they have any guidance there?
There is no guidance. I don't think the procedure is that detailed, other than the first two trains, one on each track. The first one that is going to service on track one and track two as well. So they both acknowledged and followed the instructions by the ROC. They bypassed the station. The second train, I think that was servicing track two, did not. And in review of the audio, you could tell that it was poor communication, poor radio reception. And it wasn't until the train had got to almost Silver Spring that train operator could contact ROC and say, well, I didn't hear the blanket announcement. And again, comm was sent to the station and nothing was found, in regards to communication issues. So,
well, this seems like a situation that really needs a better solution, some confirmation from the operators that they actually get the message, because there's a lot of pressure put on a train operator. We ask them to leave their station and stick their head out the window to observe passengers, boarding and alighting the train, make sure nobody's trapped in the doors and things like that. So they're not always fully focused on the radio in the train. Sometimes they're doing observations and other things that may make it difficult for them to get messages. But this has always been frustrating for me is that there doesn't seem to be a way to confirm that people actually receive the message, receive the instructions that they need to operate safely. Thank you.
Understood. And we will work with WMATA while they revamp the blanket announcements and that procedure and make sure that is addressed.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that question, Commissioner Lobby. I'd like to add to it to say this appears to be a single point failure for a situation that doesn't happen very much. I don't imagine it's very common that they're told not to stop in the station. So it's a pretty uncommon situation. And it seems to me when it's that uncommon, a single point failure is sort of asking for a problem sooner or later. Can you comment on that, Mr. Quigley?
It is. I mean, I just in agreement with you, sir. It is. It's uncommon for them to get those instructions. We will just continue to work with WMATA during this revamp of this, or when they take a look at this blanket announcement procedure, and ensure that maybe we give repeat back for more than just the first few trains going in that incident area.
Sure, Hart, this is unusual, I think, to skip a station, but there's other instructions that we've seen that have been given to train operators that they've said they didn't hear them, or ROC operators trying to contact a train operator not being able to reach them. We've also had issues with train operators not understanding instructions for particular operations instructions where they're supposed to change engines or stop at a particular limit. So yeah, this is an unusual situation, but the inability to really confirm, consistently confirm instructions that are provided by the ROC is a bigger problem than just bypassing a station during an emergency, I think.
Well, and to underscore the importance of ensuring positive communication, I mean, there's some discussion here about this being unusual, and I guess it's unusual in the sense that it's obviously not the normal service pattern. But I would suggest that the need to single track or the need to bypass a station or the need to make service delivery changes on the fly is a daily occurrence on Metrorail. So it's certainly not a rarity.
I have a question.
Yes, please, Commissioner Farrar-Dyke.
Is there a way that the ROC can overrule and make a train not be able to stop at a station?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I assume the train can be, I assume from that answer that the train can be controlled from only one place, and that's the train cab. Is that accurate?
Yeah, under manual operations that WMATA is currently running, yes.
Right.
There might be an option under ATO I'm not aware of, though.
Okay, thank you for the question, Commissioner Farrar-Dyke. Any other questions from any other commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Quigley, will you please present the next and final investigation report for today?
Yes, sir. WMSC's regular independent oversight and monitoring of Metrorail data identified an improper vehicle movement without speed commands from Medical Center Station on September 28th, 2021 that had not been reported to us as required by the WMSC program standard. We communicated this to Metrorail Safety Department on September 29th, the day after the improper movement occurred, which led to the event being officially reported to us and to the event being investigated as required by our program standard. Investigation Whiskey 0145 identified that the improper use of stop and proceed mode and movement without authorization was observed by WMATA Rail Transportation QA/QC personnel performing compliance checks. These checks are a valuable tool as part of a safety management system approach if they are conducted alongside clear and complete reporting processes to allow for effective action on the information that is identified. The QA/QC audit included observing whether operators were following procedures related to zero speed commands. Train operators who have zero speed commands at a station are required to keep their doors open until they get permission from ROC to proceed. At this point, they are permitted to enter stop and proceed mode and continue at no more than 15 miles per hour until speed commands return. As part of the QA/QC audit, speed commands were set to 0 for an outbound train servicing the medical center platform using a feature known as a turnback. However, the operator closed the doors without authorization, moving forward a few feet without authorization, and then exceeded the allowed speed limit in stop and proceed. Despite QA/QC personnel observing this safety violation, it was not immediately reported. The QA/QC personnel requested data downloads from the vehicle, which were provided several hours later. WMSC review of those data downloads the following day identified that this was a safety event. The investigation identified that QA/QC personnel did not have defined reporting requirements for safety events. Metrorail has revised its QA/QC procedure to include immediate actions and reporting procedures when identifying safety events. Metrorail has also committed to checks to ensure all written procedures are reviewed by relevant departments, such as the safety department, before implementation. The WMSC is completing an audit of the rail transportation, including QA/QC. Thank you. This completes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. This is yet another instance that makes me very uncomfortable where things went wrong at WMATA and weren't reported until we, with our surveillance, happened to discover it. So I'm very concerned about trying to figure out a way, what the reason why we have to happen to be the right place at the right time in order to notice something going wrong, as opposed to relying with complete assurance on their ability to report safety incidents. So it's not really a question, just a comment, but I'm just, unless Mr. Quigley or anybody else has something to say about my discomfort about how having to rely on an unreliable reporting process and rely on our own ability to be at the right place at the right time.
So a question, Chair Hart.
Yes, please, Commissioner Hall.
So if I understand this correctly, this scenario, we have an improper movement of a vehicle that Metro was unaware of, but we were able to find it through our review of data. Is that correct?
Let's just say, so the QA/QC department is basically WMATA's department to ensure rule compliance. So they go out and they conduct these audits. This audit was for speed commands to make sure operators were not moving a train without speed commands and without permission from the ROCC. The issue or the finding here was that QA/QC doesn't have even though it's considered a control audit, they don't have everything they need to determine if it's a pass or fail. So that was the biggest finding. They can observe and have a good idea of maybe a rule violation took place, but they couldn't determine it right then and there. So they had to request data, downloads to see what the operator exactly did. And that delays the process or the removal of somebody from service.
But our review of the data that you had access to enabled us to determine what had transpired.
Yes.
Right. And so was Metro interested in how we were able to review the data to interpret that?
I'm not too sure. I looked at the same data that they had requested and reviewed. I reviewed it before they had a chance to. So I think that's why we kind of found this before QA/QC did. Right.
So I guess all I'm getting at is that maybe there's a lesson learned in this, in that while they had access to the data, maybe the manner in which they were looking at the data didn't enable them to catch this, whereas we were.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hall. Are there any other questions for Mr. Quigley? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt all, 6 of these investigation reports. Whiskey 0140, 0141, 0142, 10143, 0144, and 0145. Is there a motion to adopt the investigation of those 6 reports?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Rush. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. Mr. Sputulnik?
Mr. Chair Hart, the vote is 5 in favor and no opposed. The motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sputulnik. We have, for giving us the result of that last vote, we have no resolutions on our agenda today. And so we're at the end of the meeting. Is there any new business from any of the commissioners that we can conduct today? Hearing none, that completes our business for today. I want to thank everyone from the public for attending this meeting. I want to thank the commission staff for all of their hard work to help ensure that the meeting ran smoothly despite Omicron. And thanks to all the commissioners for and our alternate commissioner for your comprehensive and thorough engagement in this process. As a reminder to the public, you can always report any safety concerns to the commission through our website, WMSC.gov, through our social media channels like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or by email. We expect to hold our next public meeting on March 8th, 2022. At this time, we expect that meeting will again be held remotely via video conference. We look forward to seeing everyone then. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Fraudyke moves to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Rush. Thank you for the motion and the second. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, raise your hand and say nay. Mr. Sputulnik?
Chair Hart, the vote is 5 in favor and none against. The motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Sputulnik. The meeting is hereby adjourned.